Washington's most important recruiting weekend ever is on deck.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And Lars, really big week on deck here, as we mentioned in the little cold opener there, as Washington, I don't feel that's a stretch to call this the most important recruiting weekend in school history, and a lot of that has to do with the expectations that Jedd Fisch has set. And we're going to be talking about this all week long, because there are going to be 17 prospects on campus this weekend, and Jedd Fisch set some really high expectations. He said he wants this to be the best recruiting class in school history, and he certainly has an opportunity to make that happen with the guys that he's recruited, with the guys that are coming on official visits soon. So we're just going to jump right into it here. We're going to start right here with who's in and who's out, because over the last couple of days, we've seen some guys be added to this weekend. We've seen one guy take his name out. So we'll start with Elijah Pratt, the 3-star safety who's committed to SMU. He is not coming, and I don't want to say in his place, but they've also added a couple of names. One is McKay Madsen, a 3-star athlete from Clovis North High School in California. And then you also have, we haven't really talked about this one yet, 4-star safety linebacker hybrid Madden Faraimo is going to be on campus this weekend. And then the last one is another 4-star athlete. We'll get a lot into him, is Dylan Robinson from Bonita High School in Laverne, California. Lars, any one of these guys that stand out to you in particular where you want to start?
I'll just say, anytime you can get a guy from Clovis, I think you remember the guy that came out of Clovis back in 2014? Turned out to be pretty good.
Man, there have been so many talents from Clovis that I'm kind of like, oh, which one is which at this point?
Sidney Jones.
Yeah, Sidney Jones. No, Sidney Jones went to Covina.
Did he go to Covina?
Yeah, he went to Covina.
Oh, okay. Either way, but I was going to say, that area, anytime you can get guy, and that's the one thing that we always kind of harp on when, just because a guy is listed as a 3-star or whatever, there are certain guys where if you're a 3-star there, you're probably a 4-star anywhere else in the country in terms of who you play against, the level of talent. And also the amount of 3-stars at this point that ended up being contributors and significant starters. I mean, we can just run down the list of Washington guys that came in as 3-stars and left as 4-stars and NFL draft picks. So to me, it's more about these guys that they're replacing / just bringing in. It's all about getting the talent on campus. The only way you can sign the best recruiting classes we've talked about is get the talent and let them figure it out. And this weekend, It's the first big weekend. There's got more coming up, but without question, when you look at Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I think without question, this is the biggest collection of talent that Washington's going to have on campus this year.
Absolutely. So I want to be real clear here. I did omit one name, and we're going to get to it in the second segment. I want to talk way more about him. And that's 4-star corner who is coming in this weekend. That's Daryus Dixson from Mater Dei. He'll be replacing 4-star Adonyss Currie, who most likely he's still listed as taking his visit this weekend. I don't think you or I foresee that happening after his commitment to Texas A&M over the weekend. So we'll kind of see how that one plays out. But that's one guy that I'm saving for the second segment because I'm really excited about him. But I want to talk about Dylan Robinson here for a second, because this is a guy who I wrote about him on Huskies Wire a few weeks ago. And I said, yeah, Washington's in on this 4-star receiver. I don't know if he's going to play receiver, man. I really like him on both sides of the ball. I really like him at safety. And he's just a really intriguing watch on both sides of the ball. He's big. He's 6'3", 190, just a really fun athlete that really I do think could excel on either side of the ball at the college level. And this is one of those guys where, no matter who's doing the recruiting, Washington has done such a good job. This coaching staff as a whole has done an amazing job at building these relationships and getting these guys on campus. And we've been talking about that for so long. And one of the big themes of this week is going to be closing, because that's what it's going to be, is how many guys of these 16, 17 that are going to be on campus this weekend are you going to be able to close on? Because this is not the last visit for any of these individuals. For a lot of them, it might be their first official visit. So how many of these people are you going to be able to say, all right, we're going to make that impression on you this weekend, and we're going to be able to get you to just shut down your recruitment, because this is the place that we want you to be at. We're going to sell you on whatever it is that you want to hear. it's time for that to just kind of become a reality.
And the way that it starts is when you get these guys around each other. We talked about that last week, where there's certain times where you want to get 3 or 4 or 5 guys on campus just to make sure, hey, we want to focus our attention on you guys. But when you think about the way that Jedd Fisch has built this program and how he's wanted to recruit, it's about getting as much talent as possible. It was when you mentioned Robinson, that we've seen that. We look at Rashawn Clark, look at even Vincent Holmes, where the coaching staff is clearly willing to try them on either side of the ball.
Yeah.
And it's really just about identifying top talent, identifying elite talent, blue chip recruits, all these buzzwords that we talk about. That's what matters when you get into November and December. How many blue chippers do you have? How many blue chippers are you losing to the NFL? And how many blue chippers are you replacing of those guys from the NFL? Jedd Fisch is kind of inheriting a good situation in that you're losing a lot of blue chip guys to the NFL, and you can now sell these new guys, these 25 guys and 26 guys and so on. Hey, yeah, we didn't coach those guys to recruit them, but Washington is that sell. We're trying to continue on the Washington brand that was built up by the other coaches. And I don't think any coach, and this is no disrespect to any of them, I don't think any coach in the last decade has tried to recruit to the level in year one that Jedd Fisch has. Chris Peterson got there in terms of year 3, year 4, and obviously the 2018 and 19 classes speak for themselves. I'm not saying Chris Peterson.
2020 as well, too, yeah.
Right, exactly. There were so many of those guys that had he continued on, absolutely would have stacked blue chips on blue chips. Sure. But for Jedd to do that in year one, and again, it gets back to exactly to what you said. It's one thing to get them on campus. It's another thing to close. But you look at, you got 3 receivers coming on campus, or at least 2 or 3 receivers that you want to take. Okay, we said you'll take all 3, but regardless, you're getting all the rest of your receivers on campus. You're getting some offensive linemen on campus. Your quarterback commit, Beierly, is coming up with a teammate that we'll talk about in the next segment. So all of these factors are coming into play, and that can only help in terms of if you're able to get, let's say, the over-under on this weekend, 3.5.
Yeah, I'd put it somewhere around there.
In terms of, you could probably get 4 or 5, but immediately, let's say in a couple of weeks from now, did you get 2 commits before you go into that big June weekend? Because right now they have 5 commits in the class of 2025. Yep. 2 quarterbacks, a receiver, an offensive lineman, and a running back. You need some defensive help. You need some other bodies in that class to say, hey, okay, other guys at other positions not on the offensive side of the ball are starting to buy into Steve Belichick, starting to buy into Vinny Cincinnati, John Richardson, all the defensive coaches, and they've done a perfect job of that. I remember talked about back in February or March, if Washington has 3 or 4 or 5 commits, is that a cause for concern if we get into May and June? No, because you're getting all these guys that are going to want to keep their recruitment open until June, July, and maybe even after they commit in July, you're still looking at some of these guys that think, okay, I like what Jedd to offer, but I need to see it first. And so that's where some of these other 4 and 5 star guys are going to come into play, where I love the coaching staff, I love the visit, I love the school, but with all the other schools recruiting me, I kind of want to make sure you can live up to what you're selling me. And that's all you can ask for if you're Jedd Fisch.
Absolutely. So, Lars, that being said, let's get into some of these prospects that we really want to keep a close eye on this weekend. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. You can keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So, Lars, there's one other guy that we need to discuss right here off the top, but it's one that's not really necessarily shocking. So that's why we wanted to move it to the second segment, and that's 4-star wide receiver Andrew Marsh is no longer taking his official visit to Washington. He switched that out for Penn State, and this is one that I don't think you or I are really shocked by. When he scheduled the visit. It was very impressive. Oh, okay, yeah. Let's see if they follow through with this. Obviously, doesn't look like that's going to be the case. He's going to be visiting Penn State this weekend instead, and that just kind of amplifies who Washington is in on right now. And I think the guy at the top of that list is Chris Lawson. This is somebody who's a really exciting playmaker. I really like what he's been able to do so far in his high school career. I really like what he has on film. And this is one of those guys where Andrew Marsh is certainly a top tier talent. But I think that Chris Lawson isn't too far behind him in terms of what I've seen on film. And he's one of those guys where it feels like he's been really high on Washington for a while. And he's one guy that I'm going to be keeping a very, very close eye on this weekend.
Yeah, this isn't a comp necessarily like for like in game, but when you think about when Rome Odunze came to Washington, he was a 4-star, one of the top recruits in the country, wasn't necessarily that top 5 range, played himself certainly into a top 5 receiver. When you look at how the 2024 NFL draft went, he was the 3rd receiver taken. So in that respect, when you look at Chris Lawson, yeah, he's not a top 5 player at the position. He's not the Andrew Marsh, but he's still, without question, a serviceable player as a 4-star. And I think when you look at the coaching that Kevin Cummings is going to give him, he could similarly follow in that track of good 4-star, turns into a top 10 pick, top 15 pick, top 20 pick, 2-3 years down the line of Washington. And those are the kind of things where, no doubt, obviously you want to be in on a guy like Andrew Marsh, where you come in as a top 5, I'm not saying this is again a like for like comparison, but like a Marvin Harrison Jr., right? Where you just you know talent when you see it.
He wasn't, because he wasn't in that top 5, top 10 in the class either, which is more just an interesting thing in that line. But no, I like where you're going with that, because somebody in that same exact vein who's sitting just outside the top 10 is cornerback Daryus Dixon, where when Adonyss Currie committed to Texas A&M, it was kind of, that stings. It's a big loss, where, he's moved up to right around Dijon Lee in terms of just rankings nationally for 247 Sports, where he's ranked number 42 in the country right now. But Daryus Dixon isn't necessarily super far behind him, where he's the number 11 corner in the country, sitting still just inside the top 100, number 96 overall. And this is a guy who I'm really intrigued by. I love his frame, where he's still certainly very wiry. You brought up Sidney Jones earlier. He's definitely in that mold of long and just very, very lean, and can certainly put some weight on him. But I love how aggressive he is. Our good buddy Ben Glassmeyer wrote a fantastic breakdown of him over on Huskies Wire, which is something that all the everydayers should certainly go check out. And because it tells us just such a fantastic story of who this guy is on the field. And he's such a perfect fit for this defense, where he's certainly not above Dijon Lee in terms of priority, but he's a very, very close second, in my opinion, in terms of the corners and even the safeties to an extent that not Kevin Cummings, that John Richardson, that Vinny Sunseri, that Steve Belichick have gone out and been able to set these official visits with. And Daryus Dixon is somebody who he's not going to be alone on campus. And I say that in terms of one of his teammates is going to be around, and that's Washington commit Dash Beierly, where that's certainly one of those guys that, we've talked about it before, where, you want to have those peer recruiters, guys that can help sell. Dash is the perfect example of somebody who can try to help close Daryus Dixon, who's got 2 other official visits scheduled. He's also visiting Penn State and Tennessee. But I don't know, something tells me that Washington's got an edge here, and has for a while with him.
Low key, Washington having a lot of Penn State recruiting battles. I don't know. It's interesting with them that move to the Big Ten. But to your point, actually, as I say that, it's not necessarily a cause for concern. And this may be, you didn't ask this question, but I'm just going to address this right now real quick. It's not a cause for concern that some of these guys are setting official visits and then not coming to Washington, or not even making the visit. Sometimes in the world of college football recruiting, you're not going to get every kid that you target. The important thing is you're building the relationship, so that, let's say in a couple of years, what if Andrew Marsh decides to hit the transfer portal after going to Penn State or A&M or wherever he wants to go? Kevin Cummings can point and say, hey, well, we still like you. We have this relationship, and that's really all that matters in the day and age of college football, is building those relationships, building those connections, casting a wide net. So if you go along and a couple of weeks down the line, a month down the line, some other school pops up for a kid, you're not then freaking out saying, oh, now we got to go offer somebody else. You already know who your 4, 5, 6, 7 targets are. So you can just kind of move down that list without having to necessarily freak out and have a random offer that just doesn't necessarily make sense. So for me, I just wanted to get that out there, because yes, it's obviously disappointing that some of these guys aren't visiting, but given the rest of the talent coming in, I'm not necessarily thinking there's any cause for concern.
So I like where you're going with there. I certainly agree. And yeah, I can't say I'm concerned, but it's exactly what you said there though. You got to make sure that you close on some of these guys as well. Just in that same vein, you have to make sure that you're closing on some of these guys. And there's somebody on my mind that there are a couple guys that like really stand out at the top of that list. One of them is 3-star edge rusher Devin Hyde, where he's got a long-standing relationship with Washington as a whole. He's talked about how his mom's an alum, and he's somebody who I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of the first guys to end up committing over the course of the next week and a half or so. But another name that I'm really, really intrigued by is 3-star offensive lineman Demitri Manning. This is a guy who is just absolutely massive, 6'7", 340, and is a product of Bellevue High School. And the reason that's significant, Lars, is there are only 2 prospects from the state of Washington that have sent official visits to the school. And whether that's a product of the coaching staff, the product of, the kids wanting to look elsewhere, or maybe a little bit of both, it's still very significant that you want to make sure you keep that pipeline alive, because the other one who sent an official is 4-star linebacker Zadrius Randy-Sale. He's not visiting until the end of June though. So we're going to hold off on just kind of that talk. But with Demitri Manning, it's something where this is somebody that you certainly want to sell in the program because he's got some big time offers. He's not one of the higher rated kids in the state. He's sitting just outside the top 5, I believe, from the last update, but he's somebody that you want to make sure you have around the program to be able to continue to sell that local pipeline. And like I said, he's 6'7", 340. That's an awesome prospect just to have along the offensive line where, you think about the Nate Kalepos and the Julius Buelos of the world, where I know you and I both, have a lot of respect for those guys. We love both those guys. They never turned into starting left tackle, which kind of always seemed like the plan for a guy of that size and, just that potential being ranked as 4-star guys. But they still started on a Joe Moore award-winning offensive line and helped get this team to the national championship. So I would certainly say that's still a win. That's certainly a success. And you can kind of see that with Demitri Manning in a similar mold where he's a projectable guy. And if you get him in the building, you develop him the right way, and you're able to have him start for a year or 2 years, that's a huge win.
Oh, no doubt. I remember watching it at the Under Armour camp down in Tacoma. Absolutely. I think, and to me, he should be a guard. I could see him at left guard or right guard. He did a great job against Josiah Sharma, another top, former Washington commit, top 4-star lineman, or 3-star, 4-star?
3-star right now, yeah. It's bouncing back.
But one of the no doubt talented defensive linemen on the West Coast in 2025. Absolutely held his own there. To me, I think it's a matter of where does Washington see him fitting, because he came up for an unofficial visit back in April during spring camp, I believe, at some point. Came up in the spring because clarification was not offered by the staff at Arizona when Jedd Fisch was down there. Comes up, did appear to get the offer from Washington, did set the official visit.
He's already taken the official visit as well.
To
Washington. He took his official visit the same weekend as Jaden Wayne. He moved it up.
Oh, that's right. And so, but in terms of just getting a guy like Demitri Manning in the program,
absolutely,
that's someone you don't necessarily need to have him as a tackle or guard. You just necessarily want to have a big body that you can coach and mold over 3 or 4 years, knowing, as we've said, they're going to take probably 4 or 5 linemen in this class. So in order to, you can take a couple of projectable bodies. You can take one, not it's not because it's not a project, but you can take him and not necessarily know exactly where you want to start him and figure that out over the next 18 to 24 months.
So I see where you're coming from when you say you see him as a guard. I probably think that he is one of those guys that in that mold of, Nate Kalepo and Julius Buelow, you start him at tackle and you see if he sticks at tackle. And if somebody comes in and outplays him, like let's say, 2 guys have already taken their official that we really like in this class, Douglas Utu and Champ Talele, if either of those guys, also commit and come in alongside him and just outplay him at tackle, you got to move inside the guard, that's fine. That's one thing. But he's somebody, you start him at tackle, you stick him there for a year, 2 years, you see how he develops in the weight room, you see how his technique develops on the field, and you just go from there. But that's why, outside of just the whole in-state thing, which is a huge part of this, you just need to make sure that a guy like that, you try to find a way to get him to commit, stay close to home, and utilize just that size because he's got some big time offers and there's a really, really big slate of visits coming up throughout the summer. And Lars, I don't know about you, but I mean, I know the offensive line is really important in this class. I don't think it's the most important position in the 2025 class. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at LinkedIn. Because when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Because LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job right now, but might be open to the perfect role in any given month. Over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn because LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. And that's why 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. You can post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. So, Lars, I know what I said. I'm certainly not disregarding the offensive line, but I think offensive line is priority 3 in this class. Number 1 is defensive tackle, and number 2 is linebacker. And I want to start with defensive tackle because if we look at this weekend, at the weekend of May 31st, there are certainly some more visitors that I know Washington is super high on that are coming over the next couple of weeks. June 21st is going to be an interesting one for that. But when you look at this, because as we said, Josiah Sharmer's already taken his visit. The only true defensive tackle coming this weekend is Kaleb Smith from Parker High School in Birmingham, Alabama. And I think this is a really interesting take because he's got Jordan Thomas that he plays alongside of. So he plays edge. He's listed at 6'4.5", 265. You watch his film, you look at his frame, you say, okay, this is certainly a guy who's got the frame, got the athleticism to be able to move inside. But it just says so much of what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. And that's that the defensive tackle class isn't very strong, where Josiah Sharma is the only defensive tackle on the West Coast in like the top 75 of players at the position in the country. So I really like that this coaching staff has gone out of its way and gone way out of its way, really, to try to go find some of these guys. We'll talk about Josiah Hammond probably later on, and some of these other guys that are coming in from around the country on official visits that are underrated recruits. But that just shows that they've had to do a lot of work. And Kaleb Smith is another guy where, I mean, it's something where I could certainly see him committing to Washington the next month and kind of being a trendsetter where it's not like, oh, Anquan Fagans is going to see that and say, oh, I'm going to commit to Washington as well. But one of those guys where, you know, some of these prospects from Indiana, or there are a couple visits coming from Alabama, from Florida, you look at some of these guys that aren't in Washington's normal recruiting footprint, and you know, some of these guys can say, okay, yeah, if this guy's doing it, I'm certainly going to give it a closer look, not because, you know, I think that guy is the highest impact guy in the class, but if they're willing to give it a shot, I might be able to do the same thing as well. And defensive tackle is certainly the number 1 priority for that in this class, just with the lack of talent on the West Coast, especially in 2025.
No doubt. And I'm intrigued by Smith playing potentially on the inside, because I completely agree with you. When you look at his frame, obviously he does play at the edge in high school, but our favorite word, projects more potentially on the inside, especially with a pass rushing mindset. That can be a dangerous combination, and I would love to see what Steve Belichick and Jason Capusi can do with that. I am going to go piggyback off your second take there. The linebackers, okay. To me, that one to me is when you look at the amount. For me, it's the amount of talent. It's the opposite problem of defensive linemen. It's you have so many linebackers that are 4 stars, legitimate 4 stars, top 150, 200 players in this class that want to come to Washington.
Right.
Now, does that mean they will come to Washington? No, I do want to clarify that, because Christian Thatcher has been up multiple times coming up this weekend. You look at Mark Anaconto, you look at, there's a number of other guys in this class that have Washington high on their list. If you can start to chip away at that, and it gets back to what I said last segment, you don't have a defensive commit. Somebody has to commit. And I think it's almost going to be a trio of guys, potentially, maybe even 4 or 5. And all of a sudden this class could double in size over a week and a half period. But that's because Caleb Smith, for example, is a guy that they offered back in January and February, January/February, when they made that early East Coast swing. Then he came up for an unofficial visit in April, and now he's coming back for an official in the end of May. That to me tells me there's serious interest. And so this isn't just getting offering a kid on the East Coast or in the South to say, hey, we're expanding our footprint. No, they actually have legitimate interest, and the interest has been reciprocated. So if you can close on some of those guys, and then the key just becomes, closing in May and June is only half the battle. As we both know, you can close in May and June, and then come October, when Alabama and Georgia and a couple other schools offer you, that's where things tend to get a little more interesting. But the regardless point is, get them in the boat so that you can sell, hey, by the way, we've had this relationship. I know Alabama's nice and all that. I know Georgia staying close and all that. Having those early relationships developed is really what ends up winning the day in a lot of recruits' eyes down the road. So getting all those relationships in early, this is a lot of these guys' second, third, fourth time on campus. This isn't like, wow, this is an awesome first visit to Washington. Now I'm actually considering Washington. No. We are already considering coming up. And it really does kind of carry on a theme of Jedd Fisch's recruiting, where so many of these guys wanted to commit to Jedd at Arizona. Jake Flores said he wanted to commit to Jedd at Arizona. Literally, the second he came up here, committed. Beierly was already committed. There's a number of these guys that had such high interest in Arizona that it's basically just waiting that domino effect in time to commit to Washington.
Right, and Christian Thatcher was one of those guys as well who said the same thing, that he was really close to committing to him at Arizona. And I'm glad that you want to talk about the linebackers, because it's something where you and I have discussed, recruiting when we talk about Zadrius Rainey-Sale, Christian Thatcher, Mark Hennecore, Cyrus Polo, who's another guy who's coming up, depending on who you feel on. Madden Faraimo, he's somebody who could potentially play linebacker as well. Matai Tagoai, before he committed to USC, was in this same boat as well. But the more I look at it, the more important I feel it is, because of the 4 guys going to be leaving the room after the season. So there's going to be a whole lot of openings in terms of playing time, in terms of everything else there. But then at the same point, it's about establishing the front 7 in the Big Ten, where, it's certainly been a theme for a very long time. It's, can these West Coast schools adapt and do this? And, Oregon did a really good job of this last year, getting 3 4-star linebackers like Kamar Mathudi, Braden Platt, and Dylan Williams, where they got that really nice trio of linebackers. And it seems like that's what Jedd is trying to do this year. And of course, he wants Zadrius Rainey-Sale to be that lead guy. But then Christian Thatcher's right there. Mark Hennecore is right there. All these guys you could potentially just throw into that role as well, that, maybe you want some of these guys to come in and play right away. And they certainly look like they could, because defending the run is going to be such an important thing come, whenever they're going to have to travel to Wisconsin in November, which is something that's going to happen, or when they have to travel to Penn State or Iowa. Some of these schools, you're going to have to make sure you make that adjustment. And that's something that we know Steve Belichick can do. And it's just a matter of making sure you have the personnel to match it, where I don't think that's going to be much of a problem this year, especially at linebacker with Carson Bruner, with Alfonso Tuputalo, with all those guys. But you have to make sure that this can be a long-term thing. And Jedd Fisch has said, I want to make sure that all these guys come from high school. I don't want to use the transfer portal so often. And that's where you want to make sure that these guys, you find a way to get them to commit this weekend. You find a way to get them to commit soon. And that's just a really big thing. And one other guy that I think is really important in terms of just the position itself, where we've talked about how thin it is tight end. And we haven't seen Vanderploeg yet. We know we want to see, he wants to get through all his visits and then make a decision. But another guy who's visiting this weekend, where it seems like Washington wants to take 2 tight ends in this class, is 4-star Kaleb Edwards. And this is a guy who Washington's done a fantastic job developing a relationship with him. Shout out to Jordan Powpow for doing so. And is another guy that would be such an amazing addition to this class, where honestly, Lars, after Quentin Morris done this year, he finishes his final year of eligibility, I could see the 1, 2, 3 on the depth chart next year, assuming Kaleb Edwards commits to Washington, is Kaliki Latu, Decker DeGraff, and then Kaleb Edwards. I certainly see a possibility of that happening under those circumstances. And so he's another guy that I think, as we wrap up here, is somebody who I would certainly want to keep an eye on this weekend. And I think there might be more of an emphasis on the tight end position than we think.
I agree. And I think, again, this doesn't get back totally to it, but having Dash Beierly come up with all these offensive recruits, the offensive linemen, the receivers, even a tight end, this is the perfect weekend for them to strike when the iron is most hot, because you're getting the guy that's going to be potentially throwing them the ball. And even if, let's say, Dash isn't the guy doing the throwing, still being on the team with him, still building those future relationships, so that when he is the guy potentially starting, Kaleb and these guys say, hey, yeah, remember when we came in? How many guys do we point back to in that 2018-19 class where Asa Turner mentioned it so many times, where I came in with Trent McDuffie and, Kyler and all those guys, Roman, they mention the same sort of thing. Rome coming in with Roger and those sort of things. That's how you build the foundation.
Yeah, same thing.
And that's how you build the foundation for the program 3 years down the line. Whereas, again, if Kaleb Edwards plays as a freshman, that's great. You're not expecting him to come in and be the Brock Bowers for 3 years, but by 25, 26, 27, that's when you want to start to see that. And it all points back to this weekend. That's what matters most. And let's be real, it also does point back to the Oregon game, but that's a separate thing. But it really points back to this weekend.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all everydayers for tuning in. We've got so much more fun recruiting stuff coming for you throughout this week, because it's going to be such an important week. So whatever breaking news, anything like that, it's all going to be happening right here on Locked On Huskies. So make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, like the video, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comments. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Tuesday.